Hey everybody, Andrew here, and today I'm going to be talking about a television show. I just finished season 3 of a show that I really enjoyed, and I was thinking about the show and where it is now, and then going back and how it started, and especially how the previews for it started, the original trailers and the stuff that sold us on the show. And those two are so far removed from each other that it's kind of interesting and kind of ridiculous. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. I'm going to be talking about the Orville and how the original trailers lied to us and why that is a good thing. Because if you go back and you watch the original trailers for this, it is very much trying to sell you on it being a comedy or a spoof.
The USS Orville.
Ever since I was a kid, I have wanted to serve on an exploratory vessel.
You're nobody's first choice for this job, but we have 3,000 ships to staff, and we need captains.
Can I have one of these mints?
Those are marbles. We're giving you one last chance.
Like, it is a show created by Seth MacFarlane, starring Seth MacFarlane, and the original trailers, if you watch it, are pure comedy. It is just the comedic bits from the pilot and maybe an episode later.
Time to meet the locals. Hi, I'm Captain Ed Mercer. Holy crap!
We don't mean your family any harm.
Well, we did just shoot his dad.
Aside from shooting your dad, we don't mean your family any harm.
Just the jokes. And to be fair, most of these jokes do not land even in the preview, but you get what they are selling you on. And it makes sense because Seth MacFarlane is a comedic creator. He created Family Guy, created American Dad, Cleveland Show, Ted films, and, A Million Ways to Die in the West, which is still my most interesting experience I've ever had in a theater. I was going to see that. And it really tries to sell you on that. And then you get to, by episode 3, most of that comedy is gone. It's kind of interesting to compare the two, because by season 3 there are almost no jokes. Like, I've maybe half dozen in the entire season of real, actual, we are trying to make a joke.
Let's go make some history.
I didn't prepare anything.
Just speak from your heart.
We're about to enter unexplored space. I know you're all just as excited as I am, so
Let's give this everything we got,
and
may the force be with you. How was that?
Perfect.
And instead they add a lot of deep, dramatic moments that actually, some reason, kind of work, despite on a show that should come off as goofy. So let's go a little bit over the show and how it was presented to us and what it tried to do. So, the show is basically Star Trek. Like, almost one for one. Like, it's the exact same thing. You're following a Union ship, which is the Federation. You have a captain of the Orville, which is the name of the ship. And there are alien races, and they are going out and exploring new cultures, new civilizations, new alien life forms. It is one for one Star Trek. Like, even the aliens, you can just one for one the aliens. You have the Zelani, who are the most humanoid. They are pretty much Vulcans. They are, like, basically human, except for one aspect of them that is dramatically different than humanity. In the Vulcans, it's intelligence. In the Zelani, it is strength. They are all super strong.
Door's jammed. Alara, you want to open this jar of pickles for me? I loosened it for you.
Then you have the Moclans, who are basically the Klingons. They are a mostly male race. In fact, in the beginning, you think they're an entirely male race, that there are no females whatsoever, but that may or may not be true.
Lieutenant Commander Bordus, your entire species is male, isn't it?
That is correct, sir.
Probably not a lot of arguments about leaving the toilet seat up and that kind of thing, right?
Moclans urinate only once per year.
Really? I'm up 2-3 times a night.
That is unfortunate.
It is.
And they are very much about pride and honor and respect, and very gruff and not understanding goofy moments or unserious things. You have the Kalon, who are basically Data mixed with the Borg, and are non-biological life forms. And then you have the Krill, who are basically the Kardashians with a little bit of the Klingon mixed in. They're the very religious, very specific to their people thing, and they want to take over the galaxy. So yeah, this is one for one Star Trek. And it's pitched to you, even in the pilot, that this is going to be a goofy, spoofy comedy one, because you meet Ed Mercer, who is Seth MacFarlane's character, who is the captain, and he is presented as the last choice to make as a captain. He's like, we don't want you as a captain. No, you used to have potential. You used to be someone who had that. But since your divorce, when you caught your wife cheating, you've been on a downward spiral. You've been shirking your duties. You've been showing up hungover. But we are giving you one last chance to prove yourself worthy. We are giving you command of this mid-level exploratory ship, the Orville.
I just want to say I am thrilled to be your new captain. I want this to be an efficient ship, but also one that you're glad to be serving on.
So he's like, all right, I want to take my choice of helmsman. I want my best friend Gordon Malloy, who is the best pilot in the entire fleet, but he has a tendency to he has a tendency to disrespect authority.
What is that? Is that a beer?
Yeah, I'm nervous. It's a new ship. I want to make a good impression.
It's 9:15 in the morning.
Sorry.
And he likes to play pranks and practical jokes on the rest of the crew, and a lot of, military-esque people do not appreciate that. This ends up backfiring for him on the Orville when he tries that on Isaac, and he kind of stops doing those after that point.
Are you aware that you have Mr. Potato Head pieces all over you?
I got you, man. I totally got you. See, that's a practical joke. Now it's your turn, okay? You gotta get me.
What happened to your leg?
He amputated it while I was sleeping. Ha ha. Got you.
So they go and they join the Orville, and they get to meet the whole group of characters and cast, the rest of the cast and the rest of the crew. And he finds out that his first lieutenant is going to be his ex-wife, Kelly. And you expect that to lead to lots of drama, lots of bickering, lots of emotional things.
The captain does not appear to be pleased at the arrival of his first officer.
They were married.
No way.
You know how many times I tried to talk to you, but
You weren't hearing me, or you weren't around at all, but I did try.
I was the one who suggested couples counseling.
The therapist was your brother-in-law.
This should be a really fun trip for all of us.
Perhaps we should not be talking about this.
Oh, no. We're talking about this. This is a thing.
And you get a little of that in the first episode, and then it's immediately dropped by episode 2. Like, they only ever occasionally even mention the fact that they were even a couple at some point. Like, you forget after a while that they ever were married, let alone had a very bad falling out. And yeah, the show literally becomes Star Trek. It's just going out, exploring different planets, different things. And again, the first episode is very quippy, very fast, very this, that, and the other.
We have figured out a way to manipulate the speed of events.
So, it's an anti-banana ray.
It's really interesting.
We need no longer fear the banana.
Does it work on all fruit?
What about salads?
But a lot of that drops by episode 3. So episode 3 focuses on the third in command, or the second officer, Bortus. Now, Bortus is one of the Moclan. He is one of that all-male race. And he and his spouse, another Moclan named Clyden, have just given birth to an egg. In fact, the second episode, he's literally hatching the egg for the entire episode. Get him off screen and have them do that. And they give birth to the child, and their child comes out female.
It is a female. That is impossible.
And this really upsets Clyden. Clyden is like, all right, we need to go back to Mockless. We need to go back. We need to go and have the surgery and have our child turn from a girl to a boy. And you find out through the episode that Clyden was born female. And the knowledge of that and the results of that has left him his entire life hating himself. In his mind, he has always been the freak the other. He's never been a true Moclan because of his differences. So he wants to save his child from those same problems. Now, Bortus is very hesitant to have the surgery done. He's spent a lot of time among the female crew of the ship. He knows that the females are not necessarily a negative thing, and doesn't see the reason in doing the surgery and forcing the surgery on his child.
The child will be taken to Moclus, where she will undergo the corrective procedure.
Captain Vorak, I will not allow that child to be taken off the Orville without Bortus's consent.
Captain.
Clyden ends up bringing the Moclus court into this, and they have to present their cases and do this, that, and the other. And Ed and Bortus manage to find a female Moclan who has been living in the mountains, and they present her to the court. And
what is this?
Well, look at that. Your planet's greatest writer is a female.
Say, oh, females can exist. They can survive. They are not inferior. They are not any of the things that we have believed all this time. This is proof. This is not something we have to enforce on anyone. We can allow them to exist. And the courts just go, well, we don't care. None of the stuff you presented is enough to make us change our minds, so...
It is the decision of this tribunal that the child will receive the corrective alteration.
And the child goes through surgery and becomes male. And this creates a rift in this couple that echoes through the entire rest of the show. Like, this couple is never on even footing again. There was always this tension, always this thing in the background of this fight and this argument, and Clyden forcing this change on their child against Bortus's wishes. And that comes to a real head in season 3 when that child gets old enough to notice that things are wrong with them and that things are different. And that gets to deep emotional moments, and it gets intense by season 3. Like, there's a whole thing with ends up leading to child torture, and it's a lot. And I can see this being triggering for someone who is transgender or, you know, non-binary, having this effect on them, because it gets to that level of dramaticness. It's like you can see the rift between Bortus and Clyden, because Bortus starts interacting more with more of the fellow crew, learns more about the females of the other species, learns to appreciate them, learns to understand them, while Clyden cuts himself off more. He spends more time in his room, he spends more time, you know, refusing to interact with anyone else on the crew, steeping himself in the Moclan beliefs and the Moclan's way of doing things. So much so that in a later episode in season 2, he screws over a fellow Moclan who wants to have a relationship with a female of a different species. And because he's so steeped in his beliefs and so much in that he cannot see the harm and the dangers in what he's doing. And it's one of those interesting things, because Clyden becomes a really easy character to hate because he is shown off as a pure kind of backwaters prejudice kind of person. But then you have to remember who he is and how he thinks and what he's gone through. And he spent his entire life hating himself for what he was born as. That's the thing. Like, I can sell you on this show being great just on Bortus and Clyden's relationship. Like, I could just end the video here and be like, that alone is enough of a dramatic difference from episode 1 to season 3 finale that I could just be like, that shows you the dramatic difference the show went up. These characters started off as...
Correct, sir.
Probably not a lot of arguments about leaving the toilet seat up and that kind of thing, right?
Moclans urinate only once per year.
To, our child is different and we have to accept that, but one of us refuses. Like, there's such a dramatic difference in the tone of these characters from episode 1 to the end of the series. Like, it's a lot. And I can totally see why, if you were looking for this to be a spoof of Star Trek, to be another Seth MacFarlane comedy like American Dad or Family Guy, this wouldn't appeal to you. On the other hand, I would argue this show is dramatically better the second it stops doing those comedy bits. Like, this show works very well because it does a very good look into characters and keeping them emotional and keeping them grounded and keeping them real. Like, everything about this trial should feel goofy. Like, it is two men arguing over this child, and it's them in full makeup doing this stuff. There's a bunch of shows and a bunch of things that would do this as stupid and goofy as they could. It's like, no, this one treats it like it's an actual court show, like it's the biggest deal in the world, and the show works better for having those moments. And it does that throughout all of these things, because we get to experience a lot of things that Star Trek has tried and maybe not necessarily done successfully. We get to meet characters that are two-dimensional and see an entire world that's two-dimensional and how that reacts. I remember that being a thing that happened in Star Trek Next Generation, and it just didn't really translate well because we didn't have the technology to show that well then. Or the budget. Now, like, they had, and they could do it, and they did a very good job with that. You have, I think one of the best things that you get to see in the show outside, is the Kalons, and specifically the Kalon member of the crew, Isaac. Isaac is a non-biological life form. He has no emotions. He's very logical, all thought, all processing. He joins the Orville as an observer and science officer. He's there to study biologicals and understand them, because the Kalons are very iffy about biological life. They had a very bad experience with their masters who created them, and it led to them eradicating their masters from their planet. And they are hesitant to have any interaction with other biological life forms for similar reasons. Isaac, through the course of the show, gets to learn about humans and experience things and figure things out. And he always does it from a logical, analytical point.
I am fascinated by the interpersonal behavior of biological organisms. I would be happy to attempt sexual relations with you, Lieutenant.
And that helps ground the show and makes the show more interesting. But one of the things it does in this is it does something that they never got to do in Next Generation, which is they got to show off and experience and do what it would be like for someone of this nature to be in an emotional relationship. Because that's the thing. It's like, if you look at Data from Next Generation, he never had a girlfriend. He never had a connection of this nature. The closest he got was he had a sexual experience with one of the crew, but at the time the crew member was on drugs. The entire crew was technically on drugs. So that was, lowering ambitions and getting them to do things they would normally do. With Isaac, and in this one, he ends up developing a relationship with the doctor of the crew, who is a single mother with 2 kids, and they start off at odds because, she's trying to be a single mother, and Isaac doesn't understand why she doesn't control her kids better, this, that, and the other.
The older, less intelligent one seems to derive pleasure from inflicting damage upon his younger, weaker sibling. If you wish, I will vaporize them.
No!
But they end up developing a relationship, and they end up getting close, and they end up dating, and it's like interesting to see the growth and the dynamic of how, someone without any emotional connections would have a relationship with someone who is biological and emotional, and how that would interact. And it's really good and really well written and well done, and you can see the moments that it works and see the things that it delves into, and is honestly the strongest couple in the entire show, which there's not a lot of couples to work with, but it is easily the best. And it actually ends up helping save not the show, but the events of the show. So toward the end of season 2, you get the Kalons have decided that they don't need any more biological life forms in the universe, so they decide that they're going to hunt down and destroy all biological beings. Isaac starts out kind of on their side because he's part of the hive mind. He still kind of thinks the way they do, but he ends up choosing humanity, and he saves his girlfriend's kids and teams up with the Orville and everyone to help take down the Kalon, and they manage to do that with the help of the Krill. You see like what this does to Isaac to an extent, and it's like Isaac is now kind of a drift in space, metaphorically. Basically, he can never return home. Can never go back to the Kalons because he betrayed them. But when you get into season 3, he's also not accepted by the Union and the rest of the crew. And
may I join you?
in fact, a lot of them hold grudges towards him for what the Kalon did.
You've been getting harassed by the crew and you haven't said anything?
I would remind you, Commander, that I am incapable of being hurt by such hostile interactions.
Because the Kalon led to a large number of deaths inside the Union, and a lot of people lost their lives, and yet Isaac, who was a part of that, even into the small extent that he was, is still walking around the ship without any real repercussions.
It really is a shame that you can't feel anything, because you deserve to feel all the pain in the universe.
And Isaac sees this and observes this, and one night he goes into his lab, records all of the stuff that he's like, this is all the things you need to do to make the ship run as efficiently and well as possible, finishes his log, and then terminates himself. And he dies. And they even hold a funeral, and you really think that Isaac is going to be gone from the show. And they manage to find a way to bring him back, and he ends up talking with his girlfriend, and she's asking him, Isaac, why did you kill yourself? And he's like, the ship wasn't working as effectively as it could. The crew was distracted. I was clearly the factor in that. So I removed myself from the equation. And she's like, and that's it? That's your only reason? And he's like, yes. Why? Would there be another? So they give you a really good logical reason for why he would do this. Though you have to question it, because he could have easily just left the ship. Or, turned himself off or something, presented himself to the authorities to suffer for, the crimes of his people. There's a bunch of other options. He chose to do what would be considered a very emotional response to the situation. And it's a really deep emotional dive into this. And that's the thing the show does really well, is you get these characters and you get to know them and you get to care about them. And then you get to see their emotional arcs. And the show isn't perfect. It does have some episodes that don't really work. The first season's really rough for that reason. If you go and look at the review scores for it, like season 1 has a 30% on Rotten Tomato, while seasons 2 and 3 have 100%. And there is a specific episode in season 3 that I have to bring up as an example of really bad choosing, because it infuriated me so much. And nobody talks about it. Even I went and looked at people talking about the episode, and it was 90% positive, and I'm like, did you not see this glaring problem? So there's an episode in season 3 called Twice in a Lifetime. Basically, the Orville has invented a time-traveling device that allows them to send objects forwards and backwards through time.
Can you send that 3 months into the future?
Okay.
I'm excited. Can't wait to eat that sandwich.
The Kalon find out about this. They attack the Orville. Ed decides that it needs to be destroyed, so Gordon goes down to destroy the device.
Back off now, or we'll destroy it ourselves.
Surrender the device, or you will die.
Gordon, destroy the aeronaut device.
He is sent backwards in time. he manages to send a message to the Orville, lets them know that he arrived in 2015. And the Orville decides that they have to travel back to get him, so they use the device to turn the Orville into a time machine, and they travel back, but they only have enough power to get back to 2025. So Gordon has been on the planet for 10 years. They are trying to figure out how to find Gordon, and then they just do a Google search, basically, and a newspaper article pops up with Gordon being listed as a pilot for this company, which already puts them at questioning odds, because the Union has rules about time travel. If you end up backwards in time, you are to go as far off the grid as possible. You're not to interact with anyone. You're not to risk the timeline in any way, shape, or form. So they go down to meet Gordon.
Asking for our help. Gordon.
My God. I'm so sorry it took us so long.
And they're like, what the hell? You were supposed to be off grid. What are you doing? Gordon takes them back to his house.
This is my son, Edward, and my wife, Flora.
Ed and Kelly are enraged. They're like, what are you doing? You were supposed to stay off the grid. We have rules. This could get you a death sentence in the future. And Gordon is like, hey, I've been on this planet for 10 years. I spent 2 years in isolation waiting for you. I did things that were unimaginable. I did things that in our timeline would be a death, would be a crime. I had to kill an animal to survive. That would be a death sentence in our timeline. But I had to do it to survive in this place. After 2 years, I couldn't take it anymore, and I went out and I fell in love, and I had a kid. And I'm sorry, I will take what punishments you want to give me in the future, but I am not leaving here without my family.
You have to come with us.
Forget it. You wanted us to come take you home. We're here.
10 years ago, I wanted it.
But not now.
Ed and Kelly try to force the hand and try to make him go and leave the family. He will not leave without them. They volunteered to go with him to the future, but Ed and Kelly will not do that. That would upset the timeline too much. So they go back to the ship. They go and grab their Zeleny, who is the chief of security, who basically is the super strong one, the big muscle. So come down and beat up and threaten Gordon.
No.
What's going on?
Gordon.
I'm not leaving.
You don't have a choice.
Gordon, while being beaten up, continues to refuse. So Ed stops it and is like, alright, we're going to go back in time. We're going to get you before you broke the rules, and we're going to take you back to the future. And that's what they do. And Ed explains to Gordon what happened, and Gordon is like, wow, that must have been a really hard choice for you.
For what it's worth, you did the right thing. And a future that will.
I'm so glad you made the right one. And it rolls credits. And I'm just sitting there with my jaw on the floor going, they just killed a child. Like, Ed and Kelly just murdered Gordon's child. Because that's literally what they did. That was Gordon's kid. He'd had it in the 10 years. They went back in time, prevented him from meeting this woman, thus murdering Gordon's child. And then Gordon is just like, oh, that must have been hard for you. I'm like, no, Gordon, they murdered your child. Like, I know they're never going to do it. I really want them to do a point where Gordon just turns on them and betrays them and becomes a villain, and they're like, why did you do this? And he's like, because you murdered my child before I ever got to meet them. Like, that's a villain thing. And here's how much of a villain thing that is. That was the plan of evil Emperor Zurg in the most recent Lightyear movie. The movie that came out the same year as this episode. Evil Emperor Zurg's plan is like, I'm going to go back in time, prevent us from crashing on this ship, or crashing the ship on this planet, and keep that mistake from happening. And Lightyear's like, but what about all of the lives and all the people that have shown up in the 85 years that they've been on this planet? There's entire families and people that will not exist if you go back and do this. And Evil Emperor Zurg is like, I don't care, I'm fixing the mistake. And at least Pixar was smart enough to make that the villain's plan. Like, they had the, you know, thinking enough to go, that's a horrible decision and a very bad thing. And then this show tries to play that off as the only choice. I'm like, no, you could have left Gordon in the past. He can't really affect the timeline too much. I doubt it. Or, you know, bring them all to the future. It's not like that's never been done in science fiction before. They literally did it in Star Trek, the 4th film, The Voyage Home. They brought a woman from the 1980s into the Star Trek future, and then they just left her there and never sent her home. Like, it's not like... Because here's the thing. The timeline still would have been affected if they'd just taken Gordon out and left the family there. Like, but that was the original plan. My thinking was, you take everyone, go to the future, then when Gordon is in prison, you take the family back and you put them back in the past. Like, that would have appeased everybody. But, and erased their memories, but, like, it's the worst episode in the entire show, and but weirdly, up until that point of the episode, it's a really good episode. It just has a terrible ending with no consequences. Like, you know, except for Gordon's kid, who was murdered. But yeah, that is the one real problem I have with the Orville. Otherwise, the Orville is a great show, and I highly recommend it. Because here's the thing. The way it was pitched to us is that it was a pure comedy. It's a spoof. It's making fun of Star Trek. It's going to be goofy. It's going to be weird. And then the show we got is not that at all. It's a very serious take on the Star Trek ideas and the Star Trek storytelling. And it is extremely well done, extremely interesting. It's got good characters, good arcs, good storytelling, good emotional payoff, and it's grounded. Now, did they lie to us in the early marketing? Yeah, pretty much. That flat out kind of lying. If, like, this is a comedy, it's going to be goofy and funny. Is that a bad thing? A bit. I'm someone who doesn't believe you should ever really lie in marketing. I always think you should be presenting the product as it actually is. That said, I 100% understand why they did it. Like, if you were presenting me a Seth MacFarlane show, I'm expecting it to be a comedy. I'm not expecting a serious, dramatic performance. I think that because the show isn't what it presented itself as, because it is a serious, deep drama, the show is actually better than it ever could have been as that comedy. Because comedies work, sci-fi spoofs do work, there's a lot of them that exist that are spoofs of Star Trek, but as a long-running show storytelling, it's going to lose something if you chose to keep it that way. It did not help that this was not an extremely funny or well-written comedy to begin with. Like, that pilot episode has jokes, but they're not hilarious. They're not even, I wouldn't even say they're extremely funny. But overall, I would say the show is very good. Extremely well-grounded, really interesting, well done. It's a very good homage to Star Trek. Honestly, it's better than some seasons of Star Trek. I would watch this over Star Trek Enterprise. I would watch this probably over Deep Space Nine, over the original Star Trek. I'm really looking forward to Season 4. I'm hoping they get it. I'm hoping they get to keep the budget that they had for Season 3, or even more so. But we will have to wait and see. But that's just my opinion on the show. What did you all think? Do you like the show? Do you hate the show? Is there something about the show that I didn't talk about that you would like me to discuss? Let me know in the comments below. Would you like me to do more discussions like this on television shows or things of this nature? I have been thinking about doing one about Steven Universe and what went on with that show, and especially how that show ended. Let me know if that's of any interest. Happy watching, happy reading. I will see you all next time. Bye.
A traveler comes upon the statue of an emperor, inscribed with the words, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works and despair." Only there's nothing left beside it, except empty desert. Can I have one of these mints? Those are marbles.
There's a message coming in from Admiral Halsey. It says that an executive officer has become available.
No.
Oh, crap. Sorry, man. You okay?
Yeah, it's all good, man. You okay?
Yeah, all good. Sorry.
All right, no worries. It's an anti-banana ray.
It's really interesting.
We need no longer fear the banana.
Does it work on all fruit?
What about salad?
Return fire.
Give me the device, or I will destroy your ship.
Sorry, can you move like 2 steps to your right? It's just a lot of dead space there. Just perfect. Yeah, sorry, you were just very weirdly framed.
What?